This is Melissa Gray, Program Manager with the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. I would like to welcome you to this session on volunteer transportation, keys of a successful program. I'm pleased to introduce TJ Burr, Mobility Manager with All Points Transit located in Montrose, Colorado. TJ also manages the APT Volunteer Driver Program, which began in the fall of 2015. TJ is a Kansas native and graduate of the University of Northern Colorado with a degree in journalism and mass communications. With 11 years on the front range in marketing, sales, and sales management, and the past 2 years with All Points Transit, TJ loves getting to better know this beautiful area through his outreach, education, marketing, and public education efforts that occurred through his mobility management role in the 4 counties and 4,500 square miles that APT serves. TJ spends his free time chasing 3 kids, 12, 9, and 6 years old, being outside, playing in the mountains, and avidly following his favorite sports teams. We are looking forward to a fun and energetic presentation with TJ today. So with that, I will turn things over to you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So yes, my name is TJ Burr. I'm the Mobility Manager with All Points Transit. We are located in the southwest portion of Colorado, about 5 hours from Denver, kind of equidistant between Denver, Salt Lake City, and Albuquerque, to give you a reference point. I've been in this role for about 2 years, as Melissa stated, and excited to get to talk to you a little bit more about our volunteer driver program. So just to start with on the first slide here and tell you a little bit more about All Points Transit, our mission is to promote accessibility and independence for seniors, folks with disabilities, and the general public by providing safe and reliable transportation in our service area. And as Melissa touched on, that area includes over 4,500, believe it or not, rural square miles and 4 counties here in southwest Colorado. So a lot of space, not a lot of people. We have about 33 vehicles and approximately 30 employees, 2/3 of which are drivers. We are a nonprofit, and we have 4 primary programs. One is our signature dial-a-ride service, and that's a driver-assisted door-to-door transportation program, and that exists here in Montrose, which is the biggest town in the area and where we office out of, also the regional hub. But it also exists in the smaller communities in our service region, that 4,000 square miles. With Dial-A-Ride, we take folks to medical appointments, to local clinics in the hospital, to their local senior centers, grocery stores, post offices, etc. That's our first program. Our second program is our public flex routes, and that's a traditional urban concept on a smaller scale. We have 3 routes and 73 bus stops around Montrose, and one that runs to Olathe and back 3 times a day, and Olathe is about 10 miles away. And like I said, that's just a small scale urban concept with the bus stops set around town and the drivers running their loops every hour. Those buses meet at the transfer center at the top of each hour, and they're able to flex off routes up to 3/4 of a mile to accommodate those who may not be able to get to a bus stop. The third program is our regional medical shuttle, and that funnels passengers from those small towns that I've referenced that may have a clinic at best into Montrose or maybe to Grand Junction to regional services, and we run that shuttle up to 7 times a month. Those trips range anywhere from 75 to 130 miles, believe it or not, so very, very rural, very isolated folks. And once again, Montrose really serves as a hub for this very wide rural area. And then our fourth program, which is the one I'm going to talk about today, is our smallest, but maybe one of our mightiest, and that's our volunteer driver program. So we typically have had about 4 to 5 drivers in the program at any time, but we've had as few as 1 or 2. The volunteers do share one company vehicle, which is a 2013 Toyota Prius, and I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. The quantity of our driver pool has ebbed and flowed. What we found more valuable than the quantity, of course, is the quality. Finding a champion or a volunteer that has a very open schedule, that's allowed us to accommodate the most amount of trips. I'll talk a little bit more about this also, but we've had great success in partnering with our local time bank in which their members get credit for driving for All Points Transit. That credit turns into goods or services they can receive from other members. So they drive for us and they receive something in return from the other members of the time bank. Our volunteers go through a 3-day training program, and it's really a miniature version of our paid driver training. It's very structured and done so intentionally. This helps us to vet the volunteers and make sure they are understanding of and compliant with all our policies and our procedures. And quite frankly, we also lose a decent amount of folks through this process as they get into that training and realize that the requirements of completing that certification might be a little more than they're willing to commit to. Some folks just want to show up and drive, and unfortunately, that's not the way it works. So, on to the next slide there. Our trip requests come into our reservationists, of which we have 2, reservationists or schedulers. On any given day, All Points Transit is operating 15 to 20 dial-a-ride routes. The routes are never the same. They're really designed based on the appointments of the individuals riding on that particular day, where they live, where they're going, their mobility challenges, and any gained efficiencies we can achieve by pairing them with others on similar arcs. Montrose and the Western Slope, Western Colorado, have a higher proportion of seniors and persons with disabilities than the rest of the state. It also has become a popular place to retire for folks from the Front Range. When I say Front Range, that's really Denver Metro and the urban corridor along I-25. So this area has become a popular place to retire from those urban or suburban centers. Those folks are seeking out a little bit slower paced lifestyle and a more affordable cost of living. So those dynamics really come together to put a big demand on our dial-a-ride program, which I described a little bit earlier. That program faces significant capacity challenges. We receive many trip requests that don't fit into one of those 15 to 20 paid driver routes for a number of reasons. Maybe the time that the request is, the geography, the backwards nature of the trip, and I'll talk about that. So as mentioned before, Montrose is really the regional hub for this very rural area. And Montrose is a town of about 20,000 folks, but does have the hospital and some of the other more specific service providers are here in town as well. So most of those requests, we're taking folks around Montrose, or like I spoke to, funneling folks into Montrose. But we found that as the area grows, the trend for medical is definitely that of a more regional nature. Folks move to Montrose from the Front Range, but also from the more rural towns to be closer to a higher level of service. But they keep their doctors or their preferred providers in those more rural towns that they came from. So this presents a challenge for us because we don't typically have routes that are running out of town. We're running into town. So the volunteer car allows us to fulfill some of those trips to Delta, which as you see on the slide there is 22 miles, to Ridgeway, which is to the south 27 miles, or to Grand Junction, which is the even larger, if you will, city to the north. So otherwise we'd have to say no to those trips. So this car allows us to provide some of those trips that we would otherwise have to deny. So we have a volunteer in a Prius deliver a somewhat lengthy trip for us, at least in terms of mileage. Of course, this is a very efficient way for us to fill in the gaps in our very large and rural service area. As these requests come in that don't fit on a paid route, the mobility manager, which is me, sends the request to the volunteer pool in the hope that one can claim the trip. The volunteer driver program is really emulates fairly closely our dial-a-ride service, and that dial-a-ride service is our signature program. So it is a door-to-door service. The drivers aren't allowed to enter the residence of the customer for any reason, of course, but they may assist in carrying groceries, laundry, etc., small items to the front door of the residence. And the drivers are trained to be able to provide assistance, standby assistance, not picking folks up or really maneuvering them around as much as providing guidance and stability. Every passenger that rides with us is enrolled, and part of that enrollment process is letting them know about the rules and regulations of what and how many groceries are allowed, the level of assistance they can expect, etc. Actually, we recently have designated an enrollment specialist, and she handles all of our enrollments. She's absolutely wonderful with a really top-notch level of customer service. She's very thorough in her attention to detail. Her efforts start us off on a very solid foot and mutual understanding with every new passenger. And part of that understanding is really understanding what they can expect in terms of assistance and what they can expect from their driver or their volunteer driver. As touched on, the vehicle is a shared vehicle. It's a 2013 Toyota Prius. So once again, it's very efficient in delivering the regional requests that fill up most of our volunteer driver program. We're very fortunate to have those wonderful community partners that you see there on the screen, the Region 10 Area Agency on Aging, the Community Foundation, Auto Dealer, Volunteers of America, Senior Center. Our signature Dollar Ride service delivers a lot of wheelchair and walker trips. Of course, those trips aren't going to fit within a Toyota Prius, so that's one limitation of the program. And nor would we want the volunteer with that responsibility of handling a wheelchair or walker, as they're not trained to do so. Plus, the folks that ride in the vehicle have to be ambulatory. We should know from that enrollment that I just spoke to and our driver updates if a passenger's health is improving or declining. But we should know from those things whether a individual can get into the Prius. But if we are considering a volunteer trip for someone, we will go ahead and call that individual and ensure that they can get into the vehicle. It is possible that we could fit someone with a small walker or an oxygen tank into the vehicle, and our volunteers are trained on how to secure these devices. We don't offer any reimbursements. As mentioned, our volunteers that come from the time bank do receive credit with the time bank, so that is definitely one perk for those individuals. As Melissa touched on, the program began in the fall of 2015. It really started with volunteers scheduling shifts for a set time, and it's been growing steadily since 2015, but it's really evolved since then as well. We quickly learned that those folks, or setting those folks with a set time, wasn't a very efficient way to run the program. We were often trying to find trips that would have otherwise been on route, one of our paid driver routes, and trying to give those to a volunteer. Sometimes finding none that met the criteria, leaving our volunteers bored, sitting around, kind of waiting for something to do, and becoming frustrated. And ultimately, we were starting to lose some of those volunteers as we couldn't match up our workflow and give them any work to do, for that matter. So we altered that into finding specific trip requests and sending those out to our volunteer pool. So those requests will come into our reservationist or scheduler, and they will see that they don't fit on a paid route. And I, the mobility manager, will then send that request out to the volunteer pool in the hopes that one of those folks can grab that trip. So we've had some, you can see the growth there from 107 and a couple of years ago, and we're looking at to be on pace for about 151 this year, and logged over 7,000 miles to date already. And we've had some recent discussions with area partners to expand the program even more, bring us more volunteers, hopefully allowing us to get that vehicle out almost every day. There's a particular interest or need for getting some more personal trips for seniors that the Area Agency on Aging has identified, and possibly even looking at the future purchase of additional vehicles and just the general expansion of this program. The funding model really follows our dollar ride structure, the trip fares do. We do work with Medicaid, which will cover the cost of medical transportation and some non-medical trips for those that qualify. We also work with the Region 10 Area Agency on Aging, which I talked about a couple of times, but helped us purchase the vehicle and are looking at expansion opportunities as well. Our contract with the AAA allows seniors that are 60 plus to ride for free on the volunteer driver program. Beyond that, we follow our normal dollar ride structure for the general public and people with disabilities. That would be $5 per local or regional trip, or $10 to Grand Junction. And each figure is per trip a one-way fare. As an overall operational model for our nonprofit, we also, of course, rely heavily on donations and fundraising. We just finished our biggest fundraiser a couple of weeks ago, Oktoberfest, very successful. We are increasing our efforts on both of these fronts, the donations and fundraising fronts, as we face significant operational expenses and increases in fuel and wages over the next few years. It's encouraging to see these efforts start at a board level. So these efforts impact the entire organization, which of course includes the volunteer driver program. So on the community context and collaboration, the program was started in 2015 really as a means to fill gaps in existing services. As I've touched on, as this region experiences significant growth, All Points Transit was unable to meet the increasingly high demand for services, and it's still a challenge to this day. This program was really started as basically its own mini business model, and you can kind of see the steps that were taken above. Identifying transit gaps and stakeholders who should be involved and why, where are the transit gaps in the area, both in geography and population served. Visioning, what do we envision as the primary objective of this program now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Navigating roadblocks as we got this up and going. Certification, insurance, should we have our drivers drive their own vehicle or one of ours. Finally, implementation, which occurred a few years ago, and of course, looking toward the future. We envision, as I've talked about, more volunteers, more vehicles, potentially different hubs based on the geography we serve, and just a more robust network. A little bit more on the community context and collaboration, and I won't go through all of these, but suffice to say we did have a lot of partners come to the table to help launch this program, and we were able to identify many more that possibly could have. You can kind of see that list there. It was a great example of community collaboration. The program really does fill those gaps in existing regional services, not only our own, All Points Transit, but also that of others that help cover this region too. Excuse me. On to recruitment and retention. We've really found that my role, the mobility management role, is a great one to oversee this program due to the nature of the duties that I perform in this role. I do a lot of outreach through community meetings, group and facility presentations, posting on volunteer boards, general education, just being out and about, etc. We've learned that we can never educate folks enough about the availability and diversity of our services. A lot of people, almost everyone knows we exist, but in terms of really understanding those 4 programs I briefly went over earlier, there's just never a lack of opportunity to educate folks. There are endless opportunities, really, and particularly when you take into account our wide geographical area and the many small towns that make it up. Every town has a chamber, a clinic, a post office, a salon, a grocery store, so there's endless opportunity to get out there and speak to folks. Through these opportunities, I, the mobility manager, am naturally able to tie in at least a few minutes from these discussions or presentations on our volunteer driver program. Despite all of that and all those efforts, our greatest success has really once again come from that time bank. The director of the time bank is one of our volunteer drivers, has been for a few years, and she's definitely our champion of the program too. She's delivered more trips and brought more volunteers by a large margin than I or anyone else in the organization have ever been able to secure on her own, so we can't thank her enough. Retention efforts come through constant communication and recognition, small gifts, invitations to work parties, Christmas parties, barbecues, etc. Nominations for any volunteer awards that are existing in the community. That's a big one we've discovered lately, and I'll touch a little bit more on that in the coming slides. And those folks that have truly taken the time and effort and been helped to feel like an extension of the All Points Transit staff have really been our best volunteers. And that comes from office interactions and camaraderie and just generally time spent in the office. We have a very small space as a nonprofit, a very small office of around 10 folks. So just those volunteers that truly take the time to spend a few extra minutes at the beginning or end of their shift to get to know some of the employees, those folks have really become an extension of All Points Transit and have been our most successful volunteers. Just touched on some volunteer recognition efforts. This actually Gentleman no longer volunteers for us, unfortunately, but for about a year was just incredible. We were able to nominate him for an award through a local senior newspaper called The Beacon, which is a senior paper in Montrose and Delta County, and also a different version up in Mesa County, which is Grand Junction. You can kind of see what I wrote there in the nomination. The clip does say mail to The Beacon, but you're also able to vote online. And Rory was just over the moon to be considered for this opportunity. He thanked me and he thanked All Points Transit repeatedly. They had a little program at the Beacon Fest, which is their annual festival, in which Rory and two other volunteers that made the final cut were spoken about. Had a little presentation about all three of them, and were recognized in front of the crowd. Rory really was one of the most wonderful volunteers we've had in my time here. He's that classic example of someone who really ingrained himself with the office staff and with our other drivers. He became an extension of our All Points Transit staff, and really laughed and cried, for that matter, right along with us as we live the lives of our passengers through the stories they tell us. We relied on him heavily, and he was able to deliver a lot of trips for us that we would have otherwise had to say no to. And his passengers really loved him as well. The time that our volunteers have with their passengers is often multiple hours due to the length of the trips that we've discussed. They often develop bonds through that and are able to share a lot of life with each other. And I make that point because not only are our trips valuable to our passengers, obviously, that need the transportation, but our drivers get a lot out of them too, in particular, our volunteer drivers. So actually, just were made aware of this just the other day that Rory made the cover of the Beacon Senior newspaper, which is a monthly magazine. I believe it goes out to 6,000 or 7,000 folks. Kind of see the top line there that says they have over 16,000 readers. So it is a very popular senior publication in the area. We're very proud to be able to feature him there. Rory did not actually end up winning, but ironically, the woman on the left there did win, and she's one of our passengers. So we're very excited for her. Her name is Mary Jo, and we deliver her all over Delta many times to get to her volunteer opportunities. She's an extremely active volunteer within her community. And she was very deserving of that award, and we're thankful she was recognized for her contributions to Delta. And we're glad that we can help her get to these things and play a small part in keeping her out there. Rory, as I touched on, was over the moon for being nominated, but Mary Jo was in a different stratosphere. You can kind of see her smile there in the picture. I don't think she stopped smiling yet. On to maybe the not so fun stuff, risk, liability, insurance. I touched a little bit on our training program. So we do have a 3-day training and ongoing communication with our volunteer drivers. They're subject to drug testing, a background check, a review of their motor vehicle record. They sign off on policies and procedures. They go through a drive test, etc. To expand on that drug testing a little bit, they are subject to an initial drug testing as a condition of becoming a volunteer, and then they are in a random pool after that as part of FTA requirements. They each have a radio on them at all times. The vehicle and the drivers are insured under our general company policy. The duties of the volunteer are clearly outlined, defined, and agreed upon in our volunteer handbook. So the volunteer is actually given this book, which is covered in orientation, and it's theirs to keep after that. Within that book are many forms that contain the aforementioned policies and procedures that require their signatures. We get their signatures on those, and then copies are made of the forms, of course, and kept in their files, which are kept under lock and key as with any other personnel file in our HR individual's office. And then if they are, of course, volunteers by nature are maybe a little bit older or have a little bit more free time, so often taking vacations or visiting family, things like that. If they are absent, or maybe not absent, but if they don't fulfill a trip within 3 months, basically they're considered new and have to start training anew and get recertified. Data collection, we're able to really generate the same level and depth of data from our volunteer driver trips that we do from our paid driver trips. As mentioned, we are a nonprofit, a 501c3, and we have a hodgepodge of funding that comes together to make things work. Some of that's from the FTA, some from the state level, and from foundations, as well as from various local counties, cities, and other entities, as well as contract partners like our area hospitals and clinics. Given all that, the amount of data we possess is quite abundant and very important. Everyone that we work with and that helps fund us wants to clearly understand where their money is going, of course. And as I mentioned, we also work with Medicaid, and keeping that information clean and aligned with their standards and expectations is paramount. We hope to soon get our volunteers on tablets, which our paid drivers do have already, and we anticipate this will certainly come as this program grows and be a natural next step. On to the last slide here, talking a little bit about measuring the success of the program and sharing the impact. Stories are definitely captured from our drivers and their passengers. I've got a whole cache full of them from Rory, from our time bank director that's been one of our key volunteers, from others that have volunteered over the years. The stories are endless. We hate saying no. Of course, we don't want to say no to someone who is requesting a trip to go see one of their favorite medical providers. And we know that things are changing and that these medical trips are becoming more regional in nature. So having this capability really allows us to fulfill a lot more of these trips and a lot more of these requests that are otherwise be very difficult for us to do so. And then one of our main goals as an organization is to keep folks mobile and independent and able to maintain their choice of care in the region. Really, we aim to keep them away from that higher level of care, be it a nursing home or an assisted living facility or whatever that may be. Our goal is to be able to get them out and get them to the places they need to go. You can kind of see one of our passengers there, and from a recent marketing campaign we did. This is the More Than a Ride program, and it actually won an award with our Colorado Association of State Transit Agencies, which is CASTA for short. This program was the marketing program of the year in the state of Colorado. So we feel very fortunate to get the opportunity to help keep our passengers active and mobile and independent, as this slide touches on. And we feel without a doubt that through our programs, which include the volunteer driver program, they give us a lot more than we give them. Every passenger really has a story. That concludes my presentation, so I'll toss it back to you, Melissa, and thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Well, thank you so much, TJ, for sharing All Points Transit with us and for all the wonderful experience that we were able to listen to today. So everyone have a great day.